Hello once again, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you to once again another impromptu celebration, or a rather impromptu article explaining all about Chris and responsibility. So, you may be asking yourselves right now, is the idea that, well, has Chris ever taken responsibility over the things that he's done over the years? Does he understand the concept of responsibility? And to what end, ladies and gentlemen, do you think it's even remotely possible to get through their entire life without taking responsibility? Well, first of all, the only way we can actually do this is by first going over its definition. Noun. 1. The state or fact of having a duty to deal with something or of having control over someone. A true leader takes responsibility for their team and helps them achieve goals. 2. The state or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. The group has claimed responsibility for a string of crimes. So, the first thing we have to examine when it comes to this is the fact that, well, taking the first example is the things that Chris is responsible for so that we know what we can judge him on. The first, you would suggest, is his Sonichu comics. The idea that, to be honest, even after 20 plus years of Sonichu's near existence, anyone could have possibly suggested that out of the 13, 14, or possibly even 15 comic books that Chris has done over the years, in the amount of time it's taken, Chris could have possibly have written as nearly as 60 issues of Sonichu in that time. Now, again, people might argue the logistics about Chris's state of mind, troll interference, his waning interest on the things he wants, which is an interesting little qualm that Chris never really seemed to catch on, is that he can't have it both ways. He can't expect for the whole world to lean on him whenever he decides he's going to publish a new issue of Sonichu, and he can't expect people are just going to hang around forever waiting for Chris to do something, anything, because that same audience could have moved on to somewhere else, such as Aspachu. Aspachu more or less came about by the idea that it was basically doing the exact same thing Chris was doing, except for the fact that for some reason Chris couldn't see past the irony and decided that, well, there were other reasons for the delays of his comic, all of which were blaming for somebody else, including blaming factors that were completely out of the realms of common sense and morality. Well, not morality, but out of the sense of Chris has no idea what he's talking about, such as his biological clock, which is not really down to... It's more down to biology. It's not down to a woman's fertile reproductive years. The idea is that Chris has no structure, and he is basically manning a ship with no captain at the helm, and Chris was ultimately seeking guidance. Now, again, even in this vein, if we want to talk about the comics, what's stopping Chris from deciding that if he is the man in charge for writing and drawing and distributing the comics, then did the idea of the position he was in not resonate with him enough to say, if he's going to be held accountable for all the successes, then he's going to have to make Sonichu as successful and as great as it could be. But that's another different realm of issues, ladies and gentlemen, when I come to actually talk about the writing of Sonichu, because, well, we talked about his art in one way or another, but his writing is probably just as poor as his artwork, to be honest. Now, with that being said, that's just in relation to the comics. But what about things in real life? For example, the ever-present question of 14 Branch Lane Court. Now, it's argued very strongly that Chris wouldn't be able to remove any of the hordes of junk that his parents have been hoarding for years. But at the same time, Chris was more than capable of at least trying to make space in his own room. There was nothing stopping Chris from taking stuff out of his own room and either putting it in a storage depot somewhere, or just donating it, like donating all of his video games, or just trying something to make even his living quarters a little bit more habitable. that was not out of the realm for Chris to do. And, well, you could argue that there wouldn't be any real consequences long term, short of the 2014 house fire. Chris was still partial. I mean, but the problem is that whenever it comes to things that, like Chris's bedroom or stuff like this, it could be easy for to say, well, you could say the actual upkeeping of his house was not Chris's responsibility until after his father died. But to that I say, well, why did it not occur to Chris any sooner and all that, that if he wanted to have a better living situation, or if he wanted things to be better at home, then he would have to step up and do something about it. Like, I don't know, getting a job, or at least trying to just make his house a bit more comfortable for him to live in. Now, you could immediately and then of course this brings us to the things like the financial crisis, and the fact that Chris's idea for trying to beg for money is by immediately fleecing money for extortionate prices of toys, Legos, video games, and all the rest of it. This is almost one of the most infuriating aspects of Chris's history, is the fact that whenever it comes to things that he should be accountable for and the things that he has to get into his head, Chris is not interested in any of those things. He's more interested in himself, and therefore the idea that responsibility is going to come into the forefront is completely thrown straight out the window. And it's this at point, ladies and gentlemen, where you begin to realise that Chris would rather shelve responsibility and rather live life exactly as how he wants it, which, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, when you grow up and when you become an adult and when you become held accountable for the things that you do, it's a major shock to the system for people like Chris, because outside of his sheltered childhood, and also the experiences of high school and everything that revolved around the comics to the trolls, is that it almost stunned Chris from a level of interactivity with the real world. And by the way, autism is not really an excuse for this either. But a lot of people were saying, well, if Chris lacks the cognitive abilities to be responsible or to be held to the same level of jobs, or rather the same level of care, you could say, that an adult is sort of supposed to uphold, then why was this not a thing for social services? That's something of a bit of an interesting, I'm going to turn this around just a little bit. Why didn't the social, not get involved? Why did Greene County not get involved sooner with the hoarding situation from 2009 to a lot of things that happened in 2016 when Chris was going in and out thinking that something was growing underneath his labia, to videos of his mother looking frail and disheveled? There was a lot of things that were going around that a lot of people should have, actual authorities should have stepped in. But this all brings up into, and there could have been a lot of other examples in all this, but I'm trying to explain this out of the sense that, well, Chris doesn't take responsibility for the things that he's in charge of, and he knows deep down he could have done so much better. He's not responsible financially because he will simply flounder things away because he thinks money is just something that exists in another dimension, and therefore it excuses him from having to try or care for what he does. And then even when it comes to all the things that happened in 2021, Chris decided to completely double down and say that he was healing Bob, and he claimed to be now Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu. I need a drink after that. Oh, that was a lot of words. So, what we run into, ladies and gentlemen, is the idea that, well, Chris was inept from being a real adult because it seemed too much hard work. I know that I've said this before, but one thing that Marvin, the man in the pickle suit, as well as Sir Shaq Tito have said before, is the idea that Chris will just choose the path of least resistance, not because it's easier, but because it requires so little effort. It is easier than easy. And, well, look at all the rest of it. And, well, that brings us up to the modern day. And what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is still a 42-year-old man-child who has spent time in the Nick, hasn't actually been sentenced, well, only because, well, the court, the decision sort of like came to an end, but Chris didn't accept anything. He didn't really change. He doubled down. And, well, that's the thing. This is the sort of thing that happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you don't face or you don't accept responsibility. Is that, like I said before, when it came to dignity, Chris basically has no shame in this whatsoever, because he expects there for nothing that he does to be ashamed of, because he has no concept of why people have got an issue with the things he does. And that's a big thing with people who don't take responsibility, is that people generally don't like it when people don't take accountability and they don't try and get on in the real world like everybody else. Because people in the real world go to work, they pay taxes, they pay bills, they try and get along with their neighbours, they stay, within the confines of the law. They just try to get on with their lives, and sometimes life is unfair and cruel to some people. Not through things that they could have predicted or things they could have stopped, just sometimes mean disasters happen in and out and everywhere. And yet Chris somehow manages to skirt around a lot of them and doesn't really seem to batter an eye for things that should absolutely be his doing and he should be looking into and taking care for. But like I said before, what would you expect at this point? But with all that being said and done, I hope you guys maybe have learned something out of this article, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.